Welcome to the Black Male Impact. Today we have as guest Mr. David McQueen. Mr. McQueen, welcome to the Black Male Impact.
Good. Well, let me say good day to you as well, Doctor. Really a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have.
Man, it's a pleasure having you here, man. I've seen the great work that you have been doing for the past years that I've been connected with you via social media. So it's a pleasure having you here. But before we get into the conversation, I'm just going to let the listeners know that you are a venture catalyst, also an executive coach, speaker,
Mhm.
and an author of your new book, which hopefully we get an opportunity to talk about during this conversation. But I would let you give the listeners more about yourself so they can get an understanding of who you are before we start the conversation itself.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I tend to start by describing myself as the husband of one, the father of two, and the friend of many. And I usually say this because I'm a big family man. So my parents are from the Caribbean. My mum is from Barbados. My dad is from Grenada, but I was born and raised in the UK. But Caribbean blood just runs through my veins through and through.
That's right.
Um, and that family piece has given me a real strong sense of identity in that no matter what career or what work I've done or continue to do, that piece is really important to me. So as you said, I run a number of businesses. I'm an international speaker. I'm an executive coach. And I work with a lot of organizations specifically around leadership, around how people can lead better and more effectively, regardless of where they come from.
Man, thanks for sharing that, and especially on leadership and helping organizations to lead better. I think that's one thing organization needs to be effective, not only for their workers but also for them to grow and make the impact that they want to make. So, but that's great, and also to remind us that family first in everything, and that's something that I saw in your bio.
Yeah,
So man, it's great. It's just great having you here today to talk
thank you.
about the impact of
Thank you so
Black
much.
men and what we can do to continue to make a difference. So I want to start with asking this question: what is the mindset that it takes to make a positive impact?
So I think and I truly believe that if we're really going to make a big impact, it's got to come from being part of a community of individuals who share those same aspirations and values. So, coming back to the introduction that I gave you, a big part of who I am has been grown up in a community that had a real strong sense of identity of not only where we come from, but where we're going to. And especially when I think about my own life, even some of the things that I've been through, they've been nothing in comparison to what my parents had to come through when they first came to this country. So I'm always grateful for the ancestors who brought me to this space. And so when I think back on that, I go, okay, you know what? Times can be tough, challenges can be here, but what is it that's going to make me be even more positive to make for a better future for not only for my family, but the friends or all those individuals who I can have an impact around? And so a big thing for me is the positive impact and the positive thinking comes from being part of a community or a culture of individuals who share those same values and are aligned in being positive as well.
And thanks for that reminder, because I read in an article some years ago when the
Mhm.
CEO was stepping down and he wanted to find a CEO for his organization. He, although many people had applied and they were all qualified, he
Yeah.
chose the person that aligned with his values and the
Mhm.
value, our values of the organization. So I think
Yes.
that's a great perspective to remind us how important the values are, the values we have for ourselves. And when we're choosing to be around people, hopefully they support those values. Because if we're going to be better and to be even more impactful, staying true to our values, I believe it's important. So I really appreciate you sharing that perspective. And it's a great reminder for all of us. So that leads me to my next question. What
Oh.
advice do you have for the men listening and how they can play a role in creating positive change?
So again, I think it really, really comes down to community. And one of the things I've always enjoyed and one of the things I love to give back is being part of positive male communities. Sometimes where we just take ourselves away And we provide a sense of accountability and a sense of love and a sense of compassion and a sense of support with each other. I was talking to a group actually of young students later last year. And one of the things I was explaining to them with the concept of the nod, and they had no idea what I was talking about. And so I was explaining to them, look, I can go anywhere in the world. And if I see another black man in the road, I can just raise my head and we'll do a little nod. And
That's
that's
right.
all we need to say. And for so many of these young men, it was so alien to them because they're caught up in this mindset that if you don't come from my neighborhood or from my ends or where I am, we don't have any alignment. I don't know who you are. I don't really care for you. Whereas I'm like, we recognize that we are still a minority in this space. So we're going to connect. That's how we see each other. And so I spend a lot of time with, whether it's in my physically meeting black men at least once or twice a month for dinner, and in daily connections on things like WhatsApp and Telegram. And it's a combination of putting in that really positive support about for each other, or sometimes it can be about having that that tough love as well. You know, that bit where we know somebody has stepped out of line
Yes.
and we're like, I love you, bro. I love you, but I'm going to tell you about yourself, right? I really am going to tell you about yourself. And I'm going to do it in such a way that it may hurt you in your soul right now, but it's coming from a place of love. And I want you to understand that. And so for me, I think there's a lot about being able to gender that kind of respect and fraternity between brothers, and doing it on a regular basis and reminding each other of our purpose, why we are here, not only for ourselves, but for each other as well.
Well, I think that is important just to be a part of a community because the journey can be a bit challenging at times. And being a part of a community can help us to navigate our way forward and help to hold us accountable, as you mentioned, because
Yeah.
sometimes, we need that accountability. Not
Mhm.
sometimes, we do need the
Yeah, we
accountability,
need it. Yeah.
as we continue on our journey, not just for our own selves and the things that we are doing for our personal selves, but when we show up in places, we need to be reminded of what we need to do in these spaces
Yes.
so we can be as effective as possible. And I know you mentioned just being a part of a group, it provides support. And as Black
Yes.
men, I think it's important that we are surrounded by others who will support us on this journey. And as you mentioned, I was just reflecting on what you're saying about the nod. When it comes to us as Black men, you can just be on the street and a Black man see you, he nods and stuff like that. The connection is there because they understand the importance of just appreciating that we're here and stuff like that. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And that's really a good reminder, especially on support and just having that compassion for each other and being accountable and hold each other accountable. So I appreciate that. So that leads me to my next question. How can we,
Mhm.
as Black men, help to change the narrative today?
So I think we need to be aware of the narratives that we can control. And to go back to the last point you made was just around what does that accountability around positivity look like when we are together? And I think there are so many other aspects of it as well. So, for example, I'm consciously aware that as a husband, and I make no apologies about it, being married to a black woman as well, that
So,
it stands out really strong for a lot of individuals. So, for example, in the UK, something like 49% of black men are not married to black women who are in, cohabiting relationships. And each to their own, and I'm really happy for individuals to make their own choices. But one of the things I am very, very consciously aware of a black man who's married to a black woman is the message that it sends out. It sends out messages of what I believe is really important for many people is to have a strong black family. There are traditions, there are behaviors, there are ways of seeing the world that for me are very different when you are in a black family of individuals who share the similar amount of values and positions as you do. I think of my nephews and my godchildren and on a lot of the young black men and women who call me dad, like they see me as a father figure. I've got two daughters of my own, but I say I've got hundreds of other children around who are part of my wider family. And when I say hundreds of children, I mean they're not mine, they're not physically mine, but I've adopted them and taken them as part of my family.
yeah.
And there's something around making sure that whether it's in our physical families or whether it's in our extended one, being able to model kinds of behaviors, being able to model a way that we see the world, and recognizing, look, there are lots of things that happen out there that are beyond our control. I think about how systemic racism is. And as a coach, I've had to deal with lots of people who work for these really huge, well-known firms, but who have been treated horribly. And there are times where they have had to do things like negotiate pay rises or think about how they were going to navigate working through these corporate spaces. And many of them didn't know because they have because I have the opportunity to sit at the table of senior executives and leaders. I can say, look, we come from a tradition where we've probably gone to university, for those of us who have gone, and we've literally learned what I call the migrant four. All right, so you either do law, engineering, some kind of medicine stuff, or something around finance. And those traditional pathways have been presented by our parents because they believe that education was the way out. Work hard, work twice as hard to get half as much, we were told, which is really bad maths as far as I'm concerned.
That's right.
Right? But
It
I
is.
wanted to change that. I think in my generation, we can change that. I'm like, you don't have to work twice as hard because even at 70%, you're still ahead. Work hard, definitely, but work smart. So what does that mean? That means understanding networking. That means understanding how proficient you can work in the space. It means about building connections and relationships across not only your organization, but across your industry. I say to people, look, understand about how you read a room. When you go into a room, understand how power works. Who is speaking in the room and who's being listened to? Who are the people who you need to have influence over? How do you negotiate that kind of stuff? And then also really building out a network. Who is your personal advisory team? Who's your mentor? Who's your coach? Who's the sponsor? Who are those individuals in the room that will allow you to be able to not just survive, but thrive in your career? And how can you do the same for other individuals? And I always say to people that when you hear work, people say to you, oh, your work will speak for itself. I go, I'm really happy for people who believe that. But the truth is, you need to be able to amplify that. And who are those other individuals around you that will amplify that for you? And I will take away a lot of my Black colleagues and I'll say to them all the time, when you're killing yourself for a company, always be aware they will not do the same for you. And no one's going to remember you just for all the hours you spent in the office. They're going to think about the value that you add to them as well. So a big part of the narrative around, to full circle back to your question, a big part of the narrative is being able to go, okay, what do we decide is important? Who are the individuals and the kind of values that we want to be able to make sure that we're aligned to?
Okay.
And how do we ensure that while we're going along that path, we are consciously aware of that collectively we're changing that narrative. Collectively, we're looking after our families. Collectively, we're looking after ourselves. Even if I think about the amount of health issues that affect us as Black men around stress, hypertension, high blood pressure. And many of those, some of them are genetic, but many of those are environmentally formed. So
Yeah.
how can we keep each other accountable? Like I said, I'm part of a men's group. We have 30-day challenges. And let me tell you, when that 30-day challenge gets thrown down, you are exercising every day. There is no bad drink. There is no bad food. You've got to be in your bed by a night on a weekday. And you've got to go back and report back to these guys. And that fraternity, that responsibility, that accountability allows us to start changing and shifting the narrative around how people see us as Black men. And we do it in small groups until it becomes part of a larger narrative. Does that make sense?
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Let me start at the 30-day challenge, and I think
Yes.
that is something we all need to do or to be a part of. Again,
Yes.
it helps to hold us accountable and know
Yeah.
that it's important that we take care of ourselves, because as you mentioned, and I've read this several times, where as Black men we have to work twice. Our Black people on the whole work
Mhm.
twice as hard for just get half of
Yeah.
what everyone else gets. But also, I think, as you mentioned, when it comes to our health and stress, that it's important that we take care of ourselves, because an
Mhm.
organization will replace us. They will not care about us as much as we may care about the organization. But one thing that you touched on that I believe it is really important when it comes to changing the narrative. Well, everyone have their own perspective. But one thing when it comes to us as Black people, I think family has been one of the pillars that really help to propel us forward. Because once we
Yes.
have that foundation, I think some of the challenges we will be able to overcome it because we have that support with family. And the family is a little bit different today, where everybody's trying to get caught up in all the stuff that's going on with celebrities and stuff like that. But we must understand the importance of family, because that's how we have survived, especially when it was much more challenging. So if we're going to move forward and change the narrative, as you mentioned, family is important because that's where we can have the values to help us as we navigate our journey forward. And once we can hold ourselves together, I think we can overcome more of what may come at us. And a lot of times we're going to be facing more challenges than maybe other groups because of the systemic situations and how things are set up in the world. But as you mentioned, I think family is a great way to navigate our way forward. And that extended family, as you mentioned, but having those people around us that not only look up to us, but also will provide the support as we go on this journey so we don't overdo it, but
Yes.
still able to enjoy life itself. So really, I appreciate that perspective, and hopefully we get to talk about the book, The Brave Leader, because you mentioned, with organization, I really want to kind of know about the Brave Leader, but we will
Mhm.
get to it. But I want to ask this question, and hopefully we can tie the question in this the
Mhm.
response about the book itself. But what or who
Yep.
has influenced or inspired you to pursue the path that you're on today?
Again, it was the community. I think of if I think of the most memorable man in my life, other that my dad is incredibly powerful and influential, but there was something about my granddad that kept me really centered. Rest his soul. He gave me a real appreciation for the outdoors. What I mean is the garden, soil. You know how those Caribbean men, they knew how to till the soil. They could make something from nothing. And realistically, if you're a Caribbean man, you had no need to go to a supermarket because they would teach you how to grow your own food and animals.
Right.
There was something incredibly gentle but firm about the way he navigated. And it was far from perfect. None of us are perfect, right?
Right.
But it was amazing how he did that. And then I look at my dad, and my dad growing up in 1970s England in the UK, he came to the UK when he was 19. And I look at that and I think this man left his house, a warm, lovely house with mangoes and all them lovely fruit in Grenada, got on a boat and came to cold England on his own
That's
to
right.
this space where they weren't even accepted, and then gradually became part of a workforce and became part of a church that he really, really put his foot down as to what those core values were around what he wanted to achieve and what he wanted to see. And then outside of that, I remember there was a guy, his name was Colin, his surname's gone from me now. But I remember I was about 13 and I remember he had got a job with the World Bank. And I was like, what is that? Like, what is this World Bank and what is it about? And he started to talk to me about economics, and it blew my mind that he was in that position of power. And then I met politicians, black politicians, I met athletes, I met people who are running their own business. And so I was always surrounded. I've always been really fortunate to be surrounded by these really forward-thinking men in religion and in work and in the community and in politics, who always kind of like reminded me that even though there were lots of systemic problems that would try to stop us from getting ahead, we were able to really forge ahead with it. And there were other people, definitely, but those men specifically made me very, very proud to be a black man. They made me very, very proud to be a black husband. They've made me very proud to be a black father. And I look at all those instances that I talk about, and it's so wrapped up in that part of my identity that I had all these strong role models that wherever I went to go and do something, I said, I'm not going to let things get me down because all these guys paved the way before me, and I'm going to honor them by making sure that I take lemons and make lemonade with a little bit of rum in there as well, right? Because sometimes you have to bring the Caribbean
That's
stuff in, right? But I'm going to change it and I'm going to do it slightly differently. So all those influences were, and definitely there were lots of women who were really important. My mom, my aunties, they were very important in a part of the village in lifting me up. But all those men that I mentioned before, they were very instrumental in defining how I navigated the world as a black man.
I think having great influence around us,
Yep.
I think it's important. People that we can learn from, and to realize that where we are today, it's because of those people before us. They may not have the same luxury as we have today, but we have to honor the sacrifice they have made. And as you mentioned, they have displayed, especially as you mentioned your grandfathers, there are some principles and values that he had really carved out that,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, helped to make you the person that you are today. And we all need that. We need to be around people that will help us to develop values that can help us to navigate our way forward. Because again, as Black men, we have challenges. We have things that we have to deal with that is out of our control. But if we instill certain values, we can still navigate our way forward despite those challenges, as you have mentioned, because they have shown you and because they have shown to you what can be done despite what's happening. Once we are around those kind of people, Black men especially, we feel, I think, more confident within ourselves. And once have the confidence, I think we can go through or go over some of the hurdles that we may experience on our journey. And so I really appreciate you sharing that perspective and that reminder how valuable it is to have mentors, or how valuable it is to learn from those who are around us, who show to us what is possible despite what they may have at their disposal. So, and that leads me to my next question. What is your perspective on the current climate of Black men in society today?
Ooh. Do you know what I've learned? And this is be a roundabout way of answering this question. But we are products of the environments that we are in. And one of the things that has, as I've gotten, I'm 54 now, I'll be 55 in April. And one of the things that has really hit me in this 5 decades that I've been on the earth, getting close to 6, can't believe that. But anyway, is very much our behavior is shaped by the environments that we are around. And so for many years, for about 25 years, I worked as a youth worker in London. And I'm very often working across the board with both the very gifted students who were able to go off to very top universities. I worked with individuals across all different kinds of classes, but a lot of my work was dealing with kind of raising aspirations for a lot of young Black men who came from more disadvantaged backgrounds, economically, in terms of families and all the rest of it. And it leads back to the earlier question that you asked for me. And I really realized that a lot of what we do or how we present is shaped by the environments that we are in. And so how we treat people with compassion or kindness or understanding is very much what we're exposed to. Like I remember I was brought up with, my dad had a library, and that library was full with Pan-African books. My dad gives me the joke that he once caught me in the library, age 7, reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. I'm like, I have no idea about that. But, it's because that stuff was in front of me and I immersed myself in it. Like now, even having my own house, I've got a library, and that library is full with books and what have you. And I love that. And I read a lot because for me, I want to know about the world around me. And I want to go into places informed and balanced and not to be one of those ones that walks into a room being nervous about other people.
Right.
And so the big thing for me around this question is that it really does depend on where we have been shaped and where we have been brought up and how we have been formed. If you've come from an environment where there is you do not have ambition, or you do not have hope, or you do not have a sense of love and a sense of family, then more often than not, you'll only end up being a product of that environment unless you decide to move away from it and attach yourself to something else. And again, if you're brought up in an environment where you only know about broadening your horizons, about traveling, around wealth creation, and when I say wealth creation, I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about your body, I'm talking about your environment, talking about supporting people around you, you end up repeating those habits because that's what you know. And so much of what shapes us as Black men is shaped for me by the environments that we're in. And and I decided as well, as I was saying, even when I've created groups in WhatsApp and Telegram for like-minded individuals, and there are times where I broadened the net and I had some conversations, and then I had to take some people out. I said, thank you for being here, but unfortunately, this is no longer for you. And I've had to move them out because we're not aligned. And I make no apology about it. Oh, Dave, I know I'm quiet. I said, it's not nothing to do with quiet. We're just not aligned here. And so we got to keep it moving. And so for me, a lot of the ways that I see how we show up as Black men in wherever we are in the world, I think we are products of our environment, for good and for bad.
Well, I can agree. But as I was listening to you, as you talk about your upbringing, that you had books in your homes, and that helps to shape the type of person you are, and that you develop the love for reading, being that that was your environment. But I've known, and I would just want to, kind of plug myself in a bit because that's not how I grew up. But now I do have
Mhm.
my own library because that's not what I realized. But as you mentioned, I got an opportunity to come to the States. So coming here kind of gave me a different perspective. And then,
Yes.
it broadened my horizon. So you're
Yeah.
right. The environment itself does play a part in how we see ourselves. And sometimes, as you mentioned, that we have to go outside of our immediate environment to develop different
Yeah.
perspective and form different values. And but as you
Yes.
mentioned, I think having the ambition despite your environment kind of help you when you go
Yeah.
into different environments to develop yourself because internally you may have the desire to want more despite your environment. So when you're exposed to it, the opportunity to grow, the opportunity to become better, the opportunity to develop yourself as a person, I think it becomes easier because you're going to find some people that also get the opportunity, but yet they don't develop certain values because that's not a part of what they desire. But I do think as people, we do get influenced by our environment. And as men, I think we have to be mindful and intentional
Yeah.
about what we want to, how we want to shape the future going forward. And because what we do will influence those around us, despite not having certain things or exposed to certain things, that then I think we can make those conscious decisions and try to shape a different future based on what we want and what we may think is possible. But I do think just going over what you were saying about the environment and how it shaped us, I think that really is something that we have to be mindful of as we go forward. Not just because we may not have certain things or exposed to certain things. What can we do differently? Because I do believe that we can change, but it have to be something that we desire ourselves, so we can become. But as they have mentioned, that part of who you are based on your environment going to be somewhere there in your subconscious. And if we don't constantly feed the new you, you're going
Yes.
to automatically go back to the old you. And so I really support the product of the environment, but we can actually change and become
Yeah.
more of who we want to be. But we have to be intentional by feeding our minds what will help us to stay on that journey. And that leads me to my next question. I know you kind of answered this question, but what change do you want to see in general and amongst Black men?
I want to see more joy. That's what I want to see. I want to see more joy. There's nothing, I'm going to say there's nothing because I don't know of anybody else's experience. But there's nothing more joyful to me than seeing a group of us as brothers around a table, having food, listening to music or what have you, and laughing from our belly. No inhibition, just that pure guttural laugh where we are in tears, where we can rib each other and do that stuff, but do it without harm. And there is so much pressure that I see within my community for us to be breadwinners and to be these successful men and to be able to live up to these certain standards of what manhood looks like. That I believe so many times, and it comes back to that health point, we end up pursuing those things to our detriment. And then we don't really have that space for joy. That time where we can just laugh and we can just enjoy the fruits of what it is that we have, rather than deferring everything to like so far in the future that we don't even get to enjoy the here and now. And it comes back to that bit I was saying earlier about the nod. That nod is an expression of joy. That's like, my brother, I have no idea who you are.
That's
I
right.
have no idea where you've come from. But the joy you've given me at this point in time when I see you and you see me, and we recognize we are going through some stuff and we are navigating this mad world, but I see you, that joy you can't explain it. You can't even really explain it. But for me, it's that joy. And I believe that joy then trickles down into all the other areas of our life around our security, our self-esteem, our mental wellness, our physical wellness, how we manage our money, how we manage our relationships, all those things. For me, they all trickle down. So if there's one thing I want to see more within us as brothers, I want to see more joy.
And I think that is important because, as you mentioned, the mental wellness, I think being around a part of a group that is non-judgmental, where you can talk and not only about the good things, but also the things that we may need to change and work on as men. I think that would be great. And I'll just go back to an article that I read just shortly after the pandemic, where they were talking about Black men, that they realized that they didn't have a lot of close people once they were excluded from the workplace. They felt a little bit more depressed. They felt a bit more lonely and stuff like that because they didn't have those close people. So as you mentioned, having a group that you can go to and talk and just enjoy life itself, I think it will help to make you feel better about yourself, as you mentioned, but also help with the mental well-being, because that has become a topic when it comes to us as Black men. Our mental health has been a concern. And because if we don't have the outlet or the groups, or it's not something that we grew up with, where we talk about our challenge, where we talk about how we feel, but being a part of a group somewhat will help to get past the challenge, where you feel more comfortable talking about what you may be going through. So I think that is important. But as you mentioned, that as Black men, we need to have a bit more joy, because we do grow up in a society where being more serious, I think that's the perspective. And people say that to me all the time, because most of my pictures that I'll share, I won't have no smile on the pictures. I tell them that I'm gonna, but
More
but it's,
smiles. More smiles,
huh?
Doc. I said more smiles, Doc. That's what we need. More smiles.
That's right. That's right. So, but it's something that we have to become more comfortable with, because some of us grew up in that environment where that may comes off as weak, and so we just have to realize that we can't allow society to really cause us to maybe self-harm or suppress that part of who we are. But being a part of a group, I think that supports our well-being, I think will help to break some of those barriers as we navigate our way forward. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And that's a great reminder to all of us on this journey, so we can become our best selves and be our best selves, so we can enjoy the people around us. And my next question is, what was a pivotal moment in your life?
I've had a few, so and I'm just thinking about one that really made it for me. Okay, I have one that was really pivotal, because there are quite a few, but I'll give a real pivotal one. So in 2001, I was running a tech company and doing really well. It's my wife, my eldest child at the time, and I was doing very well up until 9/11. And then when 9/11 came, literally my business imploded. All the work that I wanted to do externally and have the contracts that I had, they all got pulled, because after 9/11, essentially the world imploded, and a lot of the work that was coming so freely before just kind of like pulled back. Around that time, my wife was expecting our second child. We were expecting our second child, and my wife miscarried, and we lost our second child.
Sorry to hear that.
Uh, and thank you and appreciate it. And then because it imploded, and because of the stuff that happened with the business, I had to sell my house, because there was just no way I could afford the mortgage. And although it was our second house and I was really excited to have it, there was no way that we were going to be able to maintain and upkeep it. And I remember quite clearly around that time, at the time, or at that point in time, I didn't realize, but I had my own series of grief, and I was going through a big sense of loss, right? Because you've lost your business and all the identity that's wrapped up in that. You lose a child and all the identity that's wrapped up in that space. And then having to sell my house, my second house that I've got into the market with. And, having home ownership is a big thing here, in the UK. But a couple of things happened. And one of them I remember was a young lady who, when I was going through a really bad patch, I remember her I was mentoring her, and she held my hands and she said, I want to say something that you always said to me, David. No matter how dark the tunnel, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. And that, with a number of my friends who had supported me going through this patch and what have you, it was just a strong reminder that there's a lot of things that can happen that can be really negative as well as positive. But what we have control of is how we will emotionally respond to those situations. And it really made me realize that, okay, so I lose a house, but I can still go and rent a house and still have my family. That'll absolutely be fine. I've lost my business, but if I was able to make high six figures once upon a time, I can come back and I can do that again. We lost a child, and it really dawned on us at that moment when it was in there how people don't realize how frequent women actually miscarry and lose children. People don't realize that. But on the flip side, as the doctor said to us quite blasé, he said, okay, you lost a child, but you can go back and have great sex and have another child, which, in retrospect, people are like, crikey, did he say that to you? But it was a mind shift. It wasn't the end of the world. It was something that knocked the wind out of the sails for the moment, but we were still on course. We were still on course to achieve our goals, where we wanted to go, how we wanted to live. And that was quite pivotal in that it was one of those moments where I felt that was like the lowest that I could go to. But I was reminded that just because you dip low doesn't necessarily mean that you can't come back up. Sometimes you need a valley in order to get to the top of the mountain. And it was a real reminder for me. That was quite pivotal, that my response to a situation was more important than the situation itself. If I still am able to live and breathe and be in a good state of mind, how I take that example and use it as inspiration to be better, to bounce back, to be more resilient, to be anti-fragile, that was important. And it was quite interesting that that bit as well was the bit that really shifted my approach to the way I do professional speaking. In that it's very easy to be able to go and tell people and to be able to motivate and all the rest of it. But what's the practical stuff that you can show to individuals about how they bounce back? What's the practical guidelines that you can give to individuals about how they can take a negativity and switch it around into a positivity? Or even sometimes in that negative space, understand that sometimes we need to grieve and we need to recognize that something's staying bad with us. Let's sit in that for a moment and then recollect ourselves and then move forward. So that one, I would think, was one of the most pivotal ones, especially around my speaking and my business and how we move forward. That made a massive difference as to how I see the world.
And as I was listening to you, and I was kind of taking a bit of notes, we all experience challenges. And as you
Yes.
mentioned, the emotional response, how we respond during those times will really determine what happened. And that
Yes.
we need to see the challenges as it is a challenge and not the end of life. And that we can still come out of it. But to come out of it and win is going to be based on how we respond to the
Yes.
challenges. And as you mentioned, and I think it's a great reminder to all of us to have people around us who can give us the support, and that all is not lost once we have life. Anything is possible. But again, it's going to be based on how we respond to the situations, because there are things that we're not going to be able to control. You couldn't control what happened 9/11 and that the jobs would go away. But I think how we respond to life, and we have to understand that there are going to be things that are going to happen that we don't have control over. And the same thing with your family. You could say, man, this thing ain't going to work again. But again, you have a doctor that, was able to remind you that, man, it is still possible. So I think having those perspective or people around us to share with us how we can navigate the way forward and how we should be thinking during tough times. I think it is really beneficial as we navigate our way forward. So I appreciate you sharing, that pivotal moment and that really inspiring story, because we now see what you're doing today. Knowing that, yes, you have been through those challenges, but you're here today to impact so many people. And sometimes the challenges that we go to really give us perspective to help people. And I grow to understand that some of the things that we go through is not really about us, it's for us to help other people. I like to tell people it's because we are strong enough to go through it. So we can help
Yeah.
other people to go through what they're going through when they may be thinking that it's not possible to go through what they are currently dealing with. So I really appreciate you sharing that experience with us. So my next question is, what life lesson have you learned late in life that you believe is important and can benefit this current generation?
I wouldn't say I learned it later in life, but it became more increasingly obvious the older I got. Well, there were two. The first one for me was that it's so important to design your life around the way you want it to be. And I spend so much time as a coach explaining that to individuals, because if you've been taught right, go to school, get an education, you get an education, go and do a degree, you go and get a job, you keep your head down, you get your house and all these kinds of stuff, you end up realizing that those metrics of success and that metric of a life is designed by other people and never by yourself. So, for example, part of my life design is I have to have at least 2 holidays a year. Doesn't matter what I do, no matter what I do, what business I'm working on, I need at least 2 holidays a year, and at least one of them has got to be just me and my wife. No laptops, no phones, none of this stuff, no distraction, just us going away somewhere nice, whether it's to the Caribbean, whether it's to Africa, whatever. You just got to do it. And it was something that I always had admired from many years before. But then I remember when I was working for people, they had more control over where I could go on holiday than I had for myself. And the life design I've been able to do over the last 20 or so years was being able to write down what things I wanted to do, what experiences I wanted to have, the kind of stuff that I wanted to have for my children, as well as for my marriage. And doing that, I then dovetailed everything else into that. So I created this operating system, as it were, this ecosystem, which was about my life and all the rest of it and stuff that I wanted to do, and making sure that, the work, my business, all the other stuff dovetail into that. And if there was a conflict and it did not align with the actual ecosystem, then there was always going to be resistance. There was always going to be stress. So how do I find a way to make sure that it works within what I've aligned? And that's a tough one, especially, not everybody is entrepreneurial and going to go and work for themselves. So how do you manage that? If you're in I think of a place like where you are in America, the idea of knowing, for some of my friends in America, when they know that I have 5 weeks holiday a year as minimum, for many of them are like, are you crazy? I'm like, no, I have 5 weeks minimum. I literally have 5 weeks minimum. I never work on a Saturday. I grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist many years ago, so Sabbaths were important for me. From sunset Friday to sunset Saturday, those were my times off. I no longer subscribe to religion, but I still have my Sabbaths. It doesn't matter who you are. And my friends always laugh at me. They go, David, if somebody wrote you £1 million check, are you telling me that you wouldn't work on a Saturday? And I go, I can give you a million reasons why I would end up breaking my rule for that. But generally speaking, I just don't work on there, because it's the way I've designed my life. And my life is so much better because I determine what it is that and the direction that I'm going to go into. And the second one that I've learned, and I'll say it slightly later in life, and I think more people should learn about that, is just around your health. The biggest thing for me that you can take with you wherever you go is a good quality of life. You park the money, you park the job, park everything else. It's a really, really good quality of life. And sometimes when I think of healthcare as they have positioned it in many of the countries, I actually think it's sick care. I think what they've done is they've designed a way of eating, and they advertise, and advertising works, right? Because we go out and buy the stuff, but we'll consume stuff, and we have all this stuff pumped into our heads, and we don't want to sit down and have a meal. We want to have these fast shakes, and we want to have these protein things. Whereas nature was designed so that we look at the red tomatoes, we look at the bell peppers, we look at the greens and the cards and the chail and the mango and the blugger and the red banana and the green banana and all them kind of things. We look at that and we see that connection with soil.
Yeah.
And so we eat so that stuff nourishes our body. rather than eating to satisfy anxiety or depression or what have you. And so for me, mobility, good sleeping habits, good nutrition, making sure you've got really good water, being part of a Black community that's susceptible to hypertension, making sure that we don't go into environments that cause that stress, making sure that we eat food that manifests in our body that allows us with our blood types and the way that we live to be even better. And for me, I don't think we're taught that enough. And a lot of, I think of my parents' generation who did have, what they call hard food, and they drank Cersei and they drank bush tea and they drank all these things that for us now, you go to the shop, you have to pay a fortune just for these things in the way that they're rebranded.
Yeah.
But these were the things that made a lot of our parents strong. They never went to the gym.
Nope.
But they were strong. They were muscular. They had stamina. They had all these, and they never went to no gym. They literally just did stuff in the field or went for walks and had all this kind of stuff. So for me, the two things are being able to design a life that you want to live and making sure everything else dovetail into it and not the other way around. And the second one, which obviously should be the first to be honest with you, is to make sure that health is wealth. Health is wealth. That's the wealthiest part you are at. At some point in our life, all of us are going to get some kind of injury or disability that's going to either reduce our movement and our impact or something. And so it's so important to be able to try and maintain it as much as we can when we can. And I wish I knew that and had that message drummed into me a lot earlier than I did when I got older.
I appreciate you sharing that. I think those are really important. From creating the life you want, and everything else will have to go into. So it's not, as you mentioned, the other way around. And sometimes, we allow whatever is happening to determine what we do, and not determine what we want to do and then make the other things kind of fit into. And I think that can take us down a path where I would say, kind of lost. And because if we allow life to just take us wherever, we may end up places that we don't want to be because we're not in control of what we're doing. And I wanted to remember something that I think Napoleon Hill said in one of his books about drifters. So if we allow life to just take us wherever, we may end up places that we don't want to be. But as you mentioned, health is wealth. Because if we work, and whatever we accomplish, and we don't have the health to enjoy it, then it makes no sense. And that's one thing that I think in today's society, we sometimes forget the importance of our health. We work very hard, but we don't really take in consideration our health. And we just have to be mindful and know how important it is that we are taking care of our health. So I really appreciate you reminding us of that. So my next question, before I get to my last question, where can the listeners find and help support your work to make a difference?
So a lot of people will have connected with me on social media. So in a place like LinkedIn. So I'm there under, if you look for Mr. David McQueen, you'll be able to find me there. Or if you just type in David McQueen in Google, I can guarantee you and your listeners, I'll come in your top 3 results, and you can find me at davidmcqueen.co.uk, and people can connect with me there.
Okay. But just before if you don't mind, share one thing about the Brave Leader.
Yes. So as I'm holding it up to you, the Brave Leader, my book is officially comes out on the 30th of January in the paperback form. I think the 29th you can get it on Kindle on Amazon and on bookstore. I'll give you the real quick summary. Basically, as a coach and working with a number of leaders across the years, what I realized, a lot of people were really afraid of making decisions. And primarily the reason is because they had one of two things. Number one, they didn't know how to make decisions. And so whether that stemmed from being able to make good decisions personally or within the business, they just don't know how to. So I wanted to put together stuff around the mindset as to what that looks like. But secondly, the other bit around it was about understanding what leadership actually is. And very often I find that people want to be brave, but they don't have a system that supports that bravery. And so the main thrust of the book was, how do we create systems in our organizations, be they political, business, or civic? How do we create systems that allow people to be able to contribute, to be able to show up as leaders and take people on a certain journey and make sure that they understand it, so that then when they are faced with making decisions, when they are faced with solving problems, they have not only the right context to do so, but they have the ecosystem or framework of an organization that supports that kind of leadership in order to be able to do so. And so instead of being fearful, you be more courageous so that you can be more of a brave leader.
And thank you for sharing that. We need some brave leaders and leaders that can create a space for those around them to thrive. I believe that is important because it's not just to form the organization, but to grow the organization. And to grow the organization, I think we need brave leaders. And thanks for sharing that. So my final question to you is, what impact do you want to have on the world?
So there was a beautiful quote I read, and I think I read it about halfway between writing the book. And I can't remember who said it, but they said it's something like, you want to be able to create works of art or content that live longer than you do. And so there were two questions that I was listening to a podcast on the week. And one of them was, what are the reasons that you are alive? And the second one was, what are you willing to die for? I'm still working through the answers on that. But what it sparked in me was this sense of purpose. Why am I here? And what is it that I really want to do for myself and for those individuals around me? So in terms of positive impact, I want people to be brave. I really want them to be courageous to live the life that they want to live, that causes no harm to other people, that allows them to live life to the fullest in the time that they have here on this planet. And to be able to do so and encourage others and give permission to other people to do so as well. I'm very outspoken. I know everybody's not going to be as outspoken as me. I'm very open about the way that I love my family. I know not other people have that same kind of personality type. But the one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to live life on my terms, and I'm going to demonstrate what bravery looks like for me. So my positive impact is really about going, how do I make sure when I do that, I do it with as much kindness and compassion to other people around me, so I leave the world a better place than I found it.
I think that is important. And it's just important that we think from that perspective of leaving the world better than we found it, and be willing to show up in our authentic self, as you mentioned. And as you were saying that you're outspoken, I remember as you shared with the person did not align with the group, and you had the courage to let them know that no, your values doesn't align with what we're trying to accomplish here. And some people will allow people to be a part of what they're trying to build, knowing that they may be the one that caused it to not progress. And sometimes we have to have that courage to share that, look, you're not making the contribution that you're supposed to make to the group so we can grow. So as you were saying that, I remember you said, and that's what it takes to be courageous, to talk about the challenges, and also to point out where we may need to make some change so we can make progress. And as Black men, we need to be willing to speak up, because that's one thing that we have to get comfortable with. Because if we don't speak up, we may fall to things that are not aligned with who we are and our values. So I really appreciate you sharing and just being with us here today on the Black Male Impact. Mr. McQueen, man, it's a pleasure having
Thank you,
you
sir.
here. Finally get to meet you, see the work that you're doing, and it's really appreciative, even for me here on the other side of the world, because the content that you share helps to empower what I do. And we always need a perspective outside of ourselves. And it's good to connect with other people who wants to make a difference and who willing to challenge, the status quo. So it's a pleasure having you here.
And thank you. And thank you for creating this platform. It was a real pleasure to do that. It was long overdue. We managed to make the stars align and our calendars align eventually. But it is really, really good. And I want to encourage you and give you flowers and support you for creating this space. I think it's really important, and having listened to and watched other episodes as well, it's so nice to see the variety, the different flavors of what we bring to this actual space and making a difference. And you definitely make a difference. And it's glad to be part, even if it's a small part of that journey and the vehicle that you're using to do this. So I want to salute you and thank you for allowing me to be part of that journey with you.
Man, I appreciate you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And listeners, thanks for being here with us again. And as always, one of the goals is to bring guests that we believe will share information, insights, and perspective that is beneficial to all of us as we continue on this journey. Please continue to give your support, share, like, and encourage other people to support us as we continue on this journey to bring other Black men here to share how they have been doing their work and what we can do to continue to do the work to make a difference as we continue going forward. Thanks again for being here with us.